Good morning, welcome. Diversity, equity and inclusion trends for 2022. We have Anna Zaroda-Dąbrowska, CEO Diversity Hub, joining us. Hello, Anna.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Jess McNicholas, Managing Director, Inclusion, Diversity and Equity at State Street. Hello, Jess.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Sandra Subel, Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion, Axel Springer. Hello, Sandra. Or
Hello,
maybe it should be Subel, I suppose.
No, it's a Polish surname, so Sandra Subel. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Absolutely. I guess I should slow down a little. We have a formidable task ahead, don't we? Discussing trends in D&I is a tricky task in that D&I, in principle, resists the very concept of trend, doesn't it, as something sort of evasive and changeable, whereas we are talking about values and principles here. So can we start with that? The fundamental principle of this discussion also is that I'm not going to point fingers. So whenever you feel like addressing a question, please do without me pointing to a specific person. We've seen a lot of change over the last 2 years. So how should we address trends in that context?
Well, I can start from my point of view, as you've mentioned, using the word trends in the direct connection to diversity, equity, inclusion might be totally misleading and counterproductive in many conversations. D&I shouldn't be a trend. What I think, and I hope my partners in that conversation will also agree, that shifting the mindset from trend and connecting trend to D&I, rather thinking about prioritizing diversity and inclusion in the organization. It's a way better narrative for telling that story. On the other hand, we can probably also all agree that within the broader field of diversity and inclusion, there are certain focus areas depending on the circumstances that we're in, and perhaps in that context, using the word trend might be more relevant.
Absolutely. Anyone else would like to comment?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, certainly diversity and inclusion is something that's been here for the work that we've been doing for a long time and will continue to be so. And the focus on what aspect of diversity and inclusion one looks at, that changes depending on what's happening in society. And we've definitely seen the impact that, the COVID pandemic, it has had a huge impact on the work we do in this space, and also will continue to shape the work and how we operate as we go into 2022. I mean, the COVID pandemic has disrupted the global workforce, and that is really a complete understatement. We've had to adapt, and we're going to have to continue to adapt to new working environments with also ever shifting return to office dates for many organizations. So how we execute from a diversity and inclusion perspective will be critical to that. So we need to ensure that as we move into this permanent hybrid approach to working, that people feel that they've given the same opportunities, whether they're in the office environment in a hybrid situation or are 100% work from home. So bringing equity into that process is absolutely critical as we move forward into 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Anna, would you like to add anything? What
I understand as a trend, I think that we all agree that diversity and inclusion is not a trend. For us, it's a strategic process, and this is how we really need to consider that. But as every business process, we will see some priorities which are connected to the circumstances we live in and the circumstances we do our business. I think, I know our discussion today is not about diversity as a trend. It's about maybe some short-term trends in diversity, some priorities we expect in upcoming year or upcoming months, or a long-term shift in diversity, which can obviously is caused by economical and social situation we are facing now. So in this context, I will talk about some future trends for long term, but I see also some shorter term trends or priorities for next month.
So I suppose the key reference for us is that over the past 2 years, much as we dislike the connection between trends and D&I in general, but we've seen a lot of change, a lot of shifts, often a lot of negativity. I promised myself I wouldn't be using the most hated C acronym linked to what we've been going through, because you can hear it every day so many times. So I'm not the one to contribute to that part of the conversation. But tell me, in all those shifts and changes, lots of negativity around it, are there any positives, especially in the context of what you anticipate will be coming in years to come for diversity and inclusion? Jess, maybe we can start with your perspective. I promised I would not be pointing fingers, but still.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are, there have been, we can't get away from the fact that a dynamic shift that we've had over the last 18 months in the work from home, the hybrid working, this is something that, from a diversity and inclusion perspective, all of us, have sort of battled for that, in order to bring greater flexibility and access a wider cohort of diverse talent, if we had greater, flexible working, this certainly would be a step in that direction. And literally overnight, companies and individuals and managers and teams that perhaps weren't willing to embrace the concept of work from home and flex working had to make that decision. We were forced into that. So although there has been many, many, many negatives to the whole COVID pandemic, I do see that shift as being something positive that has come out of this dreadful pandemic and the impact that it's had on us individually and in society. It also gives us an opportunity as well to look at talent outside the regular confines of what we would have had if we were in that office environment. So being able to tap into diverse talent that perhaps was not accessible to you, I think, as a manager or as a company, is a fantastic opportunity that needs to be embraced. However, it is important that, as we move into this hybrid form of working, that everybody does have equal access to technology, to opportunities, to their colleagues that have returned into that hybrid working mode. So I think embracing, that positive aspect of what we've had to endure, I think, is a real opportunity for us as individuals and as companies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I see one, but this is my personal view about positive perspective of the pandemic, is that we came back to basics, I would say, and we came back to seeing diversity as a way to being together, to being connected, to staying, being a part of the team. To linking diversity with personal perspective and personal experience, and finding the way how to use diversity to raise the sense of belonging in a company and perceive the workplace in that perspective. For me, it was very, very positive shift because we saw the tendency that we start focusing on what divides us, what are our traits that makes us different from others, and that caused, from in our diversity hub perspective, when we talk with the business, from I would say at the backstage of that process, and we see how many problems, how many challenges they may cause. It may cause. So from our perspective, that shift to belonging, which was observed before, it's nothing new now. We talked about that also a year ago, but COVID showed showed us very, very strongly that we need to be together, we need to stay connected, and this is one of the main needs we have and expectations from the workplace. So that was the one thing. And the second, it was mentioned by Jess, the context of hiring. I think that may come again to the top of diversity and inclusion challenges for upcoming months, because we observed that COVID hit the business and now the business is growing up again. So companies will recruit more, and we will see the focus on that field of diversity and inclusion for sure in upcoming months.
Sandra.
It may cause a lot of challenges, of course, but if you ask about positive aspects, I see, I have a lot of hopes in that field.
I believe we have established enough background and perspective on what's happened, and can we now get closer to the actual trends in D&I when we look to 2022 with all the learnings and all the shifts we've seen, especially companies shifting to remote work, which they believed would be much more difficult to do, but in fact turned out to be much easier and much more universal across the landscape. So the question is, what D&I related challenges will companies be actually facing in 2022? Sandra, can we start with you?
Yes, I think I will continue building on what Jess and Anna already said. So the last almost 2 years presented us with challenges and opportunities connected to expanding and evolving the remote work culture, which creates, as we identified, opportunities, especially when it comes to hiring and working with talents from across the globe. On the other hand, that creates obstacles for creating connections. Sense of belonging in the remote work requires very different tools to be used when talking about the on-site culture. So definitely working on the topic of remote or hybrid work culture. At the same time, we will be focusing on addressing the lasting effects of the pandemic state that we're currently in, and that's definitely brings us also the focus to different diversity dimensions. For instance, a part that was not that much recognized before, connected to the caregiving duties and responsibilities that goes beyond parenthood, for instance, right? So addressing those aspects will be definitely on the radar. And I personally identify also the role of technology in the D&I work and artificial intelligence, and when it comes to hiring, leveraging those technologies, and when it comes to the data and D&I data collection, analysis, and conclusion taken from that. So those are like 3 elements that I keep on my radar for the upcoming months and the upcoming year. What I want to, however, highlight here, it's this global thinking about trends. Again, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, the one size fits all, it's a very risky approach. And talking about trends, perhaps we can identify those global overarching focus areas, but then they will be translated very differently to the local country level, company level needs and context. So global versus local perspective, when it comes to that, it also matters a lot from my perspective.
I believe one would be very naive trying to implement a one-size-fits-all policy in 2022 to D&I, given what we already know and, well, the different types of risks that companies have faced. Speaking of risks, and we only recently had a debate about overkill and fatigue. Anna, can I come back to you for a moment? Do we expect any trends in the actual fatigue and risks linked to D&I in 2022?
Well, I see it as a very strong perspective of diversity and inclusion. I wouldn't see it as a trend. I would say it's more the growing perspective we should need to take into account in managing diversity and taking responsibility for managing diversity in our company. For today, having the experience from our previous debates when we were talking about diversity overkill, or can we really overdose diversity and inclusion? I asked my team to check and to go through the comments and quality results of our recent research we had in some companies. I cannot mention which they are, of course, but I prepared for today some voices from people, and we really need to take it into account, and we really need to be ready and open to hear it, to listen it. Probably you would be surprised a bit with that. Maybe for many of you it will be kind of eye-opener, but we should be aware that we are not everyone is diversity and inclusion pro, I would say. So let's see what we have. Recognition of rights. These are quotations. We need to say it, admit. Recognition of rights and diversity should apply not only to minorities, migrants, LGBT+, and Muslims, but also to the traditional conservative and or Christian majority. Another one. The less ideology, the less divisions. Another one, focusing on differences gives opposite effects, divides people into subgroups, and this way antagonizes the environment. D&I is a leader in career now. This is how it is perceived. It leads to dishonest and pathological approach to the topic. And last one, I have more, but we don't have time. Impudence in promoting ideology worsens and spoils the friendly working environment in our company. Well, it was very surprising for me because I expected that. We know that it happens, but we really didn't realize that this is growing number of that kind of voices. We count it's about 10 to 20% of voices in companies we had research because we run diversity and inclusion audits in companies across Poland in different sectors. So this is the thing we really need to discuss when we talk about diversity and inclusion overkill. The reasons are different. It may be, the ground and not recognizing the ground, the feelings, the expectations, and the readiness of our people to implement diversity and inclusion. It may be caused by political and social situation. So the reasons may be different, but what I see as maybe not a trend, but the need to have in mind in the future of diversity and inclusion is that we really must start listening everyone, not only minorities, but also those who I have the feeling that we tend to forget about usually. This is the thing, very, very important moment of this discussion, and thank you, Łukasz, for asking me about that, because I think we need to start being fair about diversity and inclusion and start being fair and open. What are the grounds and what is the environment we are operating in? And we need to be honest with ourselves and ask these questions, ask about the readiness and the grounds we have before we start planning or implementing any action in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
What you've said so far tells me that having a sound, sustainable, if you like, D&I policy or DEI policy is a careful balancing act which can be easily overdone. It's the way I understand your voices so far. It's about values and emotions, of course, which causes people to behave radically or have radical judgments at times. So I guess it's a very tricky job to be a diversity and inclusion officer or manager in a company these days. I promised that it will be this debate and also the discussions and that follow will be very much open to our audience. And we already have a couple of questions coming from our audience. We have some questions that came to us before this debate because we opened the possibility to ask questions before. So let me ask one of them. Why is D&I so widely replaced by DEI? Are there any concrete actions being behind the term equity, or is it just a new fashion? What can companies do in 2022 to really make change in the aspect of equity? Who would like to address this question?
I think equity, and one of the things that certainly that we've taken an approach on, and I think many of us in the room will also do so. I think we are shifting from what it was D&I to I&D, and now it's ID and E. And I think it's critical that equity, and we look through that equity lens, organisations across everything that we do, to ensure that there is equity in our hiring, in our promotion, and in our development of our talent, to make sure that we are bringing equity to that process and making sure that everybody has that opportunity and are coming to that at the same level as everybody else. So it is critical that we take an inward look at us as ourselves as organisations, look across all of our processes, all of our policies, and look at that. Look at it through that equity lens. And at State Street, we've hired our new global head of equity, and that's exactly what the role that she will be playing, is taking that long, hard look at all of our policies and processes through that equity lens and making sure that is reflective. And I think I think that's going to be the game changer for us in this space and for companies across the globe.
Anyone else would like to comment? Because the number of questions keeps growing and I definitely want to ask more of them. So anyone would like to comment on acronyms and terms and equity being the latest fashion, if I were to provoke you a little?
I will just add on from my side that I'm glad that question popped up, because I had the similar observation. And I think what is really critical that we observed that shift. A couple of years ago, we were actually talking about diversity management, and we started talking about inclusion, diversity management. Now we talk and added equity. Some organizations are still rather focusing on equality, and belonging very often appears in those acronyms. And altogether, I think it's a choice that organizations have to make when it comes to positioning the topic in the organization. On the other hand, it has to come across as authentic. So there must be a specific action behind those words in the organization. And perhaps when we're not ready to do it, it's better to avoid putting that word in the name.
Thank you. Our next question looks like this: how to create a culture to focus only on education and performance of the candidate and then the employee. Once again, how to create a culture to focus only on education and performance of the candidate and then the employee. Anyone would like to comment?
As an opposite to what? I'm not sure what would be what the
There is a hypothesis in this question already, so would you like to address it the way it is? I don't think I should change it as such.
I would allow myself to develop that hypothesis, and maybe Jess and Anna will jump on that train. Because what came to my mind immediately after hearing the question is that there is a perception that instead of focusing on the skills and capabilities of the employee or the candidate for a job, we look at diversity dimensions, which creates certain advantage for people coming from the underrepresented groups. And how I read that question, how can we park aside the question of what diversity boxes a person checks, so to say, versus focusing on capabilities and the potential of the candidate and then the employee. That's how I read it. But maybe Jess and Anna want to challenge my understanding of the question before we start answering that.
With your determination.
Yeah. This one of the threats for inclusive workplace. This is also what brings comes up into my mind when I read that question, because if I understood the intention was how to implement the workplace that is based on education and performance. This is how I understand it. So I'm following Sandra, that posing the question was what that about eliminating the subjective factors or culture fit. I don't know. This is my perspective to that question. My question to question.
I believe we will not have the luxury to have all three of you address the questions that follow, but for this one, especially controversial one, would you like to comment? Or not necessarily? Jess, it was addressed to you.
In terms of how companies operate, and I think persons, the contribution that an individual can bring to a company, and the experience that they have, and the best candidate should always be hired on merit, always, and that is the way certainly that we operate. Having the opportunities and processes in place in order for you as an individual or as a company to hire and look at diverse candidates and make sure you've got diverse candidates in your selection process and in your hiring process, and you're bringing equity to that table, is critically important. But ensuring that at the end of the day, it's the best candidate who can bring the most value and experience should always be the person that's hired. And if you have diversity, if you've got that equal representation in your processes and your hiring, as you go through that process, and absolutely, you want to have those diverse candidates wanting to come to work in your organization, wanting to seek those opportunities as well. But at the end of the day, it is you hire on merit and what that individual can bring to your organization, irrespective of what their diversity or diversity characteristics are. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. And since we have three more questions at least, the next one comes from Antoni. Do you think that the business case for DEI has changed? It's enough to build a panel around this question, but still, can we address this question briefly? Do you think that business case for DEI has changed? Who would like to address that?
I think there's definitely a shift. I think there's definitely acceptance that we're not having to build a business case for it. It's becoming more and more embedded as part of an organization's culture and business requirements. It is part and parcel of how we look at our organization, what we're doing from a diversity and inclusion perspective. So it's becoming as a regular part of the agenda and discussion from a business perspective. It's not that add-on. It's not somebody from HR or a D&I practitioner coming to that meeting and making the case anymore as to why D&I and the focus that the board and the executives have on it is critical. It is becoming more embedded into the organizations. There's still work to be done for sure, but it's making that discussion easier to navigate as we move forward.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And maybe that's one of the potential trends or shifts within the D&I field, where we are moving from having departments and having the topic assigned to person, and we're moving to this direction of making DEI part of the DNA of the organization, where everyone in their job title, or not job title but job description, has D&I goals and focuses. So what you just said happening in her organization can also, or hopefully is, something that more organizations are aspiring for and focusing on in the long term.
Thank you, Sandra. We have less than 2 minutes left and 2 questions, very important questions.
Yeah. If
Anna,
I may add,
go on.
yeah, I think I would add to that, to the business case, because what I see is the business case is not maybe, it's evolving for sure, and not changing direction, but evolving and expanding. And I would add one important thing we observe, caused by maybe not COVID itself, but the uncertainty of the world we have now. And we also see it in human resources trend. It's about managing the change and be ability to address the change and be more agile and adaptive to changing environments. So this was not so much visibly seen as one of the main, I would say, business advantages of diversity and inclusion. And now it's growing because the need to be adaptive, the need to be flexible, the need to react and address the change is more and more important. So diversity gives that opportunity and better help companies to be better prepared to the changing world. And another thing is our mental health conditions. So mental health care is one of the main topics in diversity and inclusion now. So taking care of that will really help companies to address those challenges which revealed after COVID.
Thank you, Anna. The bad news is that we have no time whatsoever to address any of the 3 questions. The good news is that I'm sure, fascinating as they are, we will address those questions during the sessions that follow. So let me just read the 3 questions to you as food for thought. And the first one, I believe, is especially important in that one of the big ironies of today's world is that we see companies becoming much more inclusive than governments. And I believe it should be, if anything, the other way around. So the question coming from Justina goes like this. What if business collides with the political situation? How to solve it? How to talk about it in our teams? Should we address our fears and worries? Joanna is asking, what, in your opinion, organizations can do to avoid perception of reverse discrimination of some majority employees? And finally, Isabella is asking, how do you navigate the tensions between 2 groups of people, those who feel threatened by DEI and those who don't feel recognized in their work because they are a minority? I'm sure you will admit these are absolutely relevant.
Great questions.
Yeah, great questions.
Hopefully, I wish we had the chance to address the second.
Yeah.
So do I. But for now, all I can do is thank you most cordially for taking part in our opening discussion. Anna Zaroda-Dąbrowska, CEO, Diversity Hub. Jess McNicholas, Managing Director, Inclusion, Diversity and Equity, State Street. Sandra, Subel, Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion, Axel Springer. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a great conference.